Months before Operation Metro Surge, in June of last year, around 100 protesters gathered along Lake Street outside a taco shop, believing there was an immigration raid after Homeland Security investigators were spotted. It turned out to be a federal drug trafficking investigation, but at the time, protesters were on high alert for ICE, and the scene escalated between heavily armed law enforcement and protesters. Isavela Lopez became one of the first Minnesotans to be charged with an anti-ICE action during Trump's second term. She was charged with 4 felonies for assaulting and obstructing federal law enforcement officers. Last week, she took a plea deal, reducing her charges to a single misdemeanor, ending a year-long legal case. Isavela joins me now in the studio. Isavela, thank you very much for your time and being here with us.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if we could kind of take it back to about exactly a year ago this time, just kind of be talking about this chronologically. Could you recount what happened to you that day when you went out to a protest?
Yeah, so that day on June 3rd, I was at a coffee shop, and I was working on some things, and then some community members just let me know. And I even saw from Jason Chavez's post immediately what was happening on Lake in Bloomington. And so from there, I was thinking about whether or not it was right for me to go, but then I heard a lot of communities were coming out, like community members that I knew very well that were coming out. So it just felt right for me to go because, like, I just didn't feel right not being there with them. And so when I went that day, the first thing that I saw was a lot of pushing, shoving, mayhem, really, but also a lot of media, which I feel like, yeah, because there were so many people running around with their phones, so many people, like, shouting and, like, yelling, and it did get aggressive at some points, but I feel like a lot of that was kind of provoked in a lot of ways. And so when I saw that, by that time, the van that carried the people that they took from the restaurant had already left. And at that point, it was on Bloomington, I remember, before you turn on Lake.
Mm-hmm.
That's where a lot of the gathering and the mayhem really was at first. So by the time I got there, that van had already left. And people were furious because they knew that they had just taken people from the restaurant. And, I was talking immediately, I started asking some community members about what happened and what's going on. And it kind of sounded like from the consensus, they maybe took more people than what they needed. From that kind of consensus, I started protesting as one can and as one should. And I made it very clear about how I felt with a lot of, just the ICE presence especially. Because prior to that, I had already been watching what was going on in California and in Portland, and I knew that this was bigger than just the Twin Cities at that point. And so for me, I wanted to make it very clear that, like, it's just not okay. You know how a lot of these hyper-militarization come into any normal, regular civilian area.
There was confusion, right? People thought it was an immigration-related action just because of the kind of force of the military-style vehicles and the show of force. And later, authorities said that it was about, like, a drug investigation. It was not related to immigration enforcement. And you're saying a lot of other things were on your radar from around the start of the year and that type of thing. Eventually, from videos that I've seen, and now, as you know, a lot of people have seen, you ended up on a trash can. You went up onto the trash can. And from there, I understand, is when things took a turn. What happened?
I'm 5'2". So as is, I live a different life than somebody who's 6 foot. And I'm very aware of that. And so when I went on top of the trash can, at that point, I wasn't hitting anyone. I wasn't doing anything to invoke force. So I stood on the trash can because, again, I wanted my voice to be heard. And I was just furious. Like, the excessive force that day just felt so unnecessary. So my point was that what is the point of this? If they're going to use this excessive force, like what do we have as like people here that live in this like civilian area in this neighborhood? And so that's where a lot of my frustration was coming from. And yeah, so they were coming towards me, and at that point there was an FBI agent who specifically was just like looking me in the eye. And I think he kind of already pointed me out from the crowd because it was very intent of just like the eye contact and everything. And, immediately they were trying to move the trash can. And in my head, I was just furious about everything that was happening. And so they grabbed me from there and they slammed me on the ground. And from there was a lot of people around me as that was happening. And as I was living it, I knew it wasn't okay, and it just wasn't fair at all. I really thought I was going to get arrested. But I also knew, because there were so many people there, the actual community of that area, I also knew I was going to be okay in some ways, because I knew a lot of those people weren't going to allow that to happen. And so once a lot of people came to my aid, the FBI agent pulled me up and basically like threw me like a stick. I remember like there was 3 people who catched me because I kept like tripping. And when I finally got to the other end of a friend catching me, that's when I got even more furious. But then at that point, they had started taking out the pepper spray and spraying out people from the area. And so when that started happening, that felt like they were just spraying us up like bugs, trying to get us to basically be shooed away. But I think a lot of the questions that people brought to that area hasn't been answered. And a lot of the questions that people were shouting that day was like, basically, why are you here? Why is this happening? And they do have a report, but I think there's also just some loose ends from that day too that I don't feel like was fully cleared.
And you were not arrested that day.
No.
You were arrested in the middle of doing a media interview, correct? Mm-hmm. In the days following.
Yeah.
And I noticed when you came in here, you were nervous, perhaps because of experiences that you've had like that, of giving a media interview and coming and being taken.
Yep.
What were you thinking during that moment?
So it happened on June 3rd, and then I got arrested June 9th. I already had an idea of the hysteria that was going on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't just scared about, the FBI or the government or how they'd see me, but also just like everyone else that felt a type of way with all of the civic pushback from this administration.
The next year of your life up until now, would you share some of the ways that this impacted you, whether it be financially, emotionally? Did you feel like you could go out and continue to protest? Mm-hmm. How has this year been?
It literally felt like numbing. It literally felt like that flight or flight response, right? There's fight, flight, but then there's also frozen. And I feel like that's where I kind of felt stuck in, which was really weird because I'm the type of person who's very like invested in like my community and just being around and like helping. But that was just something that I had to be so much more weary and think about. When they did arrest me, they like basically pushed me on the ground and my shoulders hit the ground first. And that's how I even got the scar. My shoulder was like gushing blood when they came and arrested me. And so I think a lot of my fear from all of that happened was that like the force that would be okay on a person, and then after the fact still be potentially going to trial for all of that. It did make me rethink about just how people keep wanting to legitimize the system when it just feels like there's no justice right now at all.
You felt that you had been victimized by law enforcement that day.
Mm-hmm.
When Operation Metro Surge began, 6 or so months after your experience of having been arrested from that protest, and you saw some of the images that were emerging for yourself, what did you think based on the experience you had had and then what transpired at the start of 2026 this year?
Well, when the report was released on me, I was actually in Sherburne County when that happened. So I like watched it real time on TV as I was behind bars in jail.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so seeing that and my mugshot on the screen, I was horrified because I was just like, this is just not the person that I am. But at the same time, I also, I knew that there was a shift happening in my community. And so because of that shift, I also knew that I'm not a criminal. All of these things that they're saying on me isn't right. And even after I came out, people were doxing me, basically saying that like, oh, she was there for a drug dealer, XYZ. And I think in a lot of ways I was racially profiled because for them it was like, oh, she fits the bill on this case. She looks like the people we took, basically. And so for me, I had to remind myself that as I was going through everything else, that this isn't the person that I am and this doesn't reflect like my community at all. I think in a lot of ways when I first got out, some people got really scared and some people didn't really want to be around me because of, fear of being watched or being followed or anything. But at the end, I feel like either way, once Metro Search happened, that was like the floodgates, when all the fear just started moving everybody else. And that was really difficult because for me, I spent a lot of it inside or just like kind of shifting my role when it came to being in the community. I usually I'm in, the front lines and helping out as much as I can there. But, I ended up just actually making Know Your Rights zines and translating that into Spanish for a lot of the people in my community. And just, taking a different role as a community member of, what does it look like to shift in a different way. Because, you still want to be there as much as you can.
It sounds like your interaction was with FBI agents, not ICE agents. The way that things have unfolded in the last year or so, there are, though, concerns that the Justice Department is overcharging some protesters to try to send a message. Based on kind of what you were just telling me is that you felt you had to stay inside because you had these pending charges. And then fast forward to just recently in the past month or so, your case concluded with you deciding to plead guilty to one misdemeanor. You had originally been charged for 4 felonies of assault. Tell me, if you would, about your decision-making process in that and deciding that you were going to go ahead and take this deal.
At that point, it had been a whole year where I was kind of thinking back and forth of like what was going to happen in this trial. And so because I was on pretrial release, there are certain conditions that I had. They took away my passport. I had to be checked every month. I had to do a drug test. So I knew when everything was happening for that whole year, it felt like I was being watched. Honestly, there were some times where I was scared that they were gonna bust through my my studio and just take me. There was times where I had dreams where it felt like I literally was taken away and then I passed away. And so the fear was really, really heavy. But I knew it wasn't the whole truth of the situation. And so that's what kind of kept me going, was that I knew that a lot of what I was feeling was what they want a person to feel, is powerless in some ways. But I couldn't let myself to get to that point. And so when they offered me the plea deal, it was a big hesitation, but ultimately I ended up taking it because I knew it wasn't just affecting me, it was affecting a lot of people that were worried about me. And also there's just so many, they switched it up and they're still taking people right now. A lot of the people that were actually charged from Metro Surge, a lot of their cases are being either dropped or, like me, significantly reduced. And so I knew that okay, there's a tide that's turning here. And I knew that my case was representing that tide. And a lot of these other people haven't been speaking up because of the fear of it. And so for me, I was like, well, this would allow me to at least like talk more about it.
I wonder if having this case conclude in this way has made you be able to breathe a little easier and think about the future and think about what your activism looks like moving forward. I know you're also a spoken word artist. Are you starting to think about what this looks like, what life looks like now? Because it's not great to have a misdemeanor on your record either, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I do have a lot of dope people around me that I know that understand who I am and sees like the impact. As somebody in my community says, like right now, like the rules are changing right before our eyes. People can say that that was just that happened or I deserved it, whatever. At the end of the day, the murders of Alex Pretty and Renee Good still haven't come into full justice. And it's the same entity that also charged me with that misdemeanor. But at the same time, those people haven't had any repercussions. I kind of just see my case as like the signs of the times of what's going on. Because at the end of the day, there's so many more detention centers and people that are being arrested right now. For me, I don't see myself as this person. I see myself as more of just like refuses to like give in to how whatever narrative they want to display me as, because I just don't see it like that.
You feel like you have your voice back in a way that you can talk about what happened. How are you creating and healing, or what does that journey look like for you right now?
Right now, actually, I wrote this poem when everything went down. And so I'm working on a video for it to kind of describe how that felt like when it came to ICE coming around in our community. Because it's not just me that's being affected right now. It's like everyone that looks like me or anybody that are children of immigrants, like, or just are immigrants, period. That there's this fear whether or not like we belong here or like whether or not this is meant for us. And it's just, there's a lot of turmoil, whether or not you agree with it or not. There's mourning on both sides. There's a lot of grieving. And so for me, I'm trying to channel that with my art of just like questioning that more. Like, why is it that we are accepting the status quo as that is, whether or not you are for this or you're not? I don't think anyone is okay right now.
Isavela, thank you for sharing your experience with us. We really appreciate your time.
For sure. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to NPR News for the latest from Minnesota Now and the latest reporting on federal immigration enforcement in Minnesota.